Now to some breaking news just through, and CNN is reporting tonight that a plane has crashed into the World Trade Center. We can now confirm a second plane has crashed into the second tower of the World Trade Center.
On the morning of September 11th, 2001, 4 commercial airplanes were hijacked over American skies. 2 struck the Twin Towers of New York. 1 hit the Pentagon. 1 went down in a field in Pennsylvania. Nearly 3,000 people died in a matter of hours. The man who ordered those attacks was already one of the most wanted men on earth. His name was Osama bin Laden. And to understand how one man built a movement that shook the world, we have to go back. All the way back to a family, a fortune, a faith, and a turn that no one who knew the quiet boy from Jeddah could have predicted. This is the complete story of Osama bin Mohammed bin Awad bin Laden, from birth to death. Every verified fact, every turning point, every decision that changed the world. To understand Osama bin Laden, you must first understand the empire into which he was born. Because it was not just any empire. It was the empire that literally built modern Saudi Arabia. Mohammed bin Awad bin Laden was born around 1908 in the Hadramaut Valley of Yemen, a region famous for producing enterprising men who left the peninsula in search of fortune. Mohammed was illiterate, one-eyed from a labor accident in his early years, and almost completely self-made. He arrived in what would become Saudi Arabia sometime in the 1920s, working initially as a porter, then as a bricklayer. He had a gift for organization, for managing men, and for understanding what powerful clients wanted. His breakthrough came through proximity to power. As the Saudi royal family consolidated its rule over the Arabian Peninsula, it needed builders. Mohammed bin Laden became that man. He cultivated a personal relationship with King Abdul Aziz ibn Saud, the founder of modern Saudi Arabia, and earned a reputation for 2 things that royalty valued enormously: speed of delivery and absolute discretion. By the 1950s, the Saudi bin Laden Group held the exclusive contract for the construction and maintenance of the 2 holy mosques in Mecca and Medina. In Islam, there is no more sacred trust. To be the custodian builder of the holiest sites in the Muslim world was not merely a business contract. It was a statement of religious legitimacy that money alone could never buy. The oil wealth pouring into Saudi Arabia after World War II transformed the bin Laden Group from a prosperous contractor into one of the largest construction companies in the Middle East. By the time of Mohammed bin Laden's death in a plane crash in 1967, the family fortune was immense, and the bin Laden Group's revenues in the decades that followed would reach into the billions of dollars annually. Mohammed bin Laden fathered somewhere between 54 and 57 children across more than 20 marriages over the course of his lifetime, always maintaining the Islamic legal limit of 4 wives simultaneously, but cycling through partners with remarkable frequency. Osama, the name means lion in Arabic, was born on the 10th of March, 1957, in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia. He was the 17th son. His mother was Hamida al-Attas, a Syrian-born woman of Palestinian origin. Her background was different from the other mothers in the bin Laden household. The other bin Laden children reportedly gave her a nickname that stung: the slave. Whether meant literally or as a social slight, it placed Osama in a marginal position within the vast family constellation. Mohammed bin Laden divorced Hamida shortly after Osama's birth. Osama remained with his mother, who subsequently remarried a businessman named Muhammad al-Attas. He grew up with 3 half-siblings from his mother's second marriage. He was not abandoned by the bin Laden family. He received a share of family income and maintained his inheritance rights. But he did not grow up in the main compound, surrounded by dozens of brothers. He grew up slightly apart, slightly peripheral. This psychological fact of being a bin Laden, but not entirely of the bin Ladens, is noted by nearly every serious biographer as relevant to understanding the man Osama would become. He craved recognition. He sought belonging. He wanted, more than almost anything, to be seen as someone who mattered. In 1976, Osama bin Laden enrolled at King Abdulaziz University in Jeddah, studying economics and business management. He was, by multiple accounts, not an exceptional academic student, diligent rather than brilliant. His passion was not economics, but the religious and political discussions that filled his time outside the classroom. At university, he came under the influence of Abdullah Azzam, a Palestinian Islamic scholar who had developed a comprehensive theology of jihad, not as a defensive obligation to protect one's community in extremis, but as an individual religious duty incumbent on all Muslims when Muslim lands were under threat. For a young man searching for meaning and for a cause worthy of his enormous inherited resources and his deep religious conviction, Azzam was electrifying. He also encountered the works of Sayyid Qutb, the Egyptian intellectual, who is perhaps the single most influential theorist of modern political Islam. Qutb divided the world into 2 camps, the realm of true Islam and the realm of Jahiliyyah, pre-Islamic ignorance, which he applied not only to non-Muslim societies, but to most contemporary Muslim governments as well, judging them apostates for adopting Western values. The implications were revolutionary. Apostate governments could legitimately be overthrown. Mainstream Islamic scholars had comprehensively condemned Qutb's conclusions, but they had spread quietly through study circles across the Muslim world. Osama bin Laden encountered them at university, and they resonated deeply. In 1974, at the age of 17, Osama had married for the first time. His first wife was Najwa Ghanem, a Syrian cousin on his mother's side. The marriage had been arranged by the families and was, by Najwa's own later account, a conventional and, in its early years, genuinely affectionate union. She would eventually bear him 11 children. On the 24th of December 1979, the Soviet Union launched a full-scale military invasion of Afghanistan. More than 100,000 Soviet troops crossed the border to prop up the country's communist government. The invasion sent shockwaves through the Muslim world. For devout Muslims who saw the world through the lens of religious obligation, this was not merely a geopolitical event. It was an assault on a Muslim people by an atheist superpower. The duty of jihad in defense of Muslim lands, which Abdullah Azzam had been articulating with such passion, suddenly had a real, immediate, and urgent application. Afghanistan was where the theory met reality. For Osama bin Laden, sitting in Jeddah at 22 years old, the Soviet invasion was the defining event of his generation. Here was a Muslim land under attack. Here was a cause that was unambiguously righteous. Here was a place where a man of faith, resources, and conviction could make a difference. From December 1979 onwards, his direction was set. In 1980, Osama bin Laden made his first trip to Pakistan, the staging ground for the Afghan resistance. He brought with him something most volunteers could not offer: money, substantial money. His personal fortune gave him immediate credibility and access. He also brought equipment, earth-moving machinery, trucks, and building materials used to dig tunnels and construct the infrastructure of a guerrilla campaign in some of the most inhospitable terrain on Earth. The Tora Bora cave complex in the White Mountains near the Pakistani border was in part constructed during this period. The Afghanistan Jihad of the 1980s was, it should be understood, not a clandestine or controversial enterprise. It was supported and celebrated by a remarkable coalition, the United States government, which funneled billions of dollars in weapons and training to the Mujahideen through the CIA and the Pakistani Intelligence Service, the ISI, the Saudi government, which matched American funding dollar for dollar, and Pakistan, which provided the logistics, training camps, and political cover for the entire operation. The common enemy was Soviet communism. Abdullah Azam established the Maktab al-Qidamat, the Services Bureau, based in Peshawar. Its function was to recruit, fund, and organize the thousands of Arab volunteers flowing in from Egypt, Saudi Arabia, Jordan, Yemen, Algeria, and across the Muslim world. They came to be called the Arab Afghans. Osama bin Laden became the Bureau's principal financial backer and increasingly its operational partner, a funder, organizer, recruiter, and symbol. The son of one of the richest families in Saudi Arabia, giving up comfort to support the Mujahideen. By the mid-1980s, bin Laden was spending more time inside Afghanistan itself. In 1986, he established his own military base, Al-Masada, the Lion's Den, in the mountains of Bakhtia province near the Pakistani border. The defining moment of his military mythology came in the spring of 1987, at what became known as the Battle of Jaji. A large Soviet force moved to overrun the Lion's Den. For several days, a small group of Arab fighters under bin Laden's command held off the assault before the Soviets eventually withdrew. Bin Laden, speaking to Arab journalists who came to Jaji, described the experience in terms that were deliberately epic. He spoke of divine intervention. He spoke of the cowardice of Soviet soldiers in the face of men who sought martyrdom. The story spread through Arab media and mosque networks worldwide. Bin Laden was now not merely a wealthy donor, but a warrior. Whether his personal role was as heroic as the account suggested is disputed by military historians. What is not disputed is the impact of the story on his reputation and his own self-image. As the Soviet Union began its withdrawal from Afghanistan in 1988, a question presented itself to the network of Arab volunteers. What next? Abdullah Azam favored a conservative answer. Fighters should return home or move to the next Muslim conflict requiring defense. Bin Laden had a different, far more ambitious vision. He wanted an organization that would not merely respond to conflicts, but would actively pursue the liberation of Muslim lands from what he was increasingly framing as a global project of Western and Zionist domination. The founding meetings that established what would become known as al-Qaeda, the base, took place in Peshawar in August 1988. The minutes of these meetings were later recovered by intelligence services and published extensively. They are remarkable documents, bureaucratic in their formality, chillingly matter-of-fact in their content. The new organization would have a military committee, a political committee, and a financial committee. Members would swear a personal oath of loyalty, the bayah, to their commander. There would be standard operating procedures, accounting systems, and administrative structures. Al-Qaeda, from its founding, was not a loose association of fanatics. It was a disciplined, hierarchical organization built by a man with a construction company background who understood logistics and management. In November 1989, Abdullah Azzam was killed in Peshawar by a bomb that destroyed his car. Who was responsible has never been definitively established. Among the suspects proposed by various investigators have been the CIA, Pakistani intelligence, Israeli intelligence, Egyptian jihadists who disagreed with Azzam's approach, and, most controversially, elements close to bin Laden himself. The killing has never been solved. With Azzam gone, there was no longer any serious competitor for leadership of the Arab-Afghan network. Osama bin Laden returned to Saudi Arabia in 1989 as a celebrated figure who had helped defeat a superpower. He gave lectures, met senior officials, and was received as a returning hero. But the relationship was already more complicated than the public reception suggested. He had returned with specific political grievances and an increasingly radical ideology that did not sit comfortably with the Saudi government. The event that broke the relationship decisively was Iraq's invasion of Kuwait in August 1990. The Saudi royal family faced a genuine military threat, and their response was to invite the United States military to deploy forces on Saudi soil. Bin Laden had a proposal. Let him bring back the Arab-Afghan fighters and defend Saudi Arabia without the need for American soldiers. The proposal was politely declined. American troops arrived. For bin Laden, the presence of non-Muslim military forces on the Arabian Peninsula, the land of the two holy mosques, was not merely a political misjudgment. In his theological framework, it was a desecration, a violation of something fundamental. He said so, loudly and repeatedly. The Saudi government placed him under a travel ban, which was eventually lifted. In 1991, he left Saudi Arabia for Pakistan and then Sudan. In 1994, the Saudi government took the final step. It stripped him of his citizenship and formally disowned him. The bin Laden family publicly denounced him and cut off his personal income from family sources. He was, officially and formally, an outcast. Sudan in the early 1990s was one of the few countries whose government was willing to host Osama bin Laden. Hassan al-Turabi, the powerful Islamist ideologist who effectively controlled the Sudanese government, saw bin Laden as a useful asset. Bin Laden arrived in Sudan in 1991 and established what amounted to a small state within a state. He built a compound outside Khartoum. He established construction companies that built roads for the Sudanese government. He set up training camps where jihadist recruits from around the world received military training. It was during the Sudan years that al-Qaeda began to develop as a truly global operational organization. Men who passed through Khartoum were dispatched to Bosnia, Somalia, Yemen, and the Philippines. The organization developed expertise in forging documents, establishing front companies, moving money across international borders, and communicating securely. In October 1993, American forces in Mogadishu, Somalia, suffered the losses memorialized as Black Hawk Down, 18 American soldiers killed in a single firefight. Al-Qaeda later claimed to have provided training to the Somali militias involved. What is clear is that the humiliating withdrawal of American forces from Somalia in 1994 was observed with great interest by bin Laden, who drew what would prove to be a fatally mistaken conclusion, that Americans could not endure casualties and that a relatively small number of deaths would cause the United States to abandon its commitments. In May 1996, under combined international pressure, Sudan asked bin Laden to leave. He returned to Afghanistan, a country now controlled by the Taliban movement, which had swept out of Pakistani madrasas in 1994, and by September 1996 had taken Kabul. The Taliban's leader, Mullah Muhammad Omar, was initially suspicious of bin Laden's media profile. But bin Laden had money, and the Taliban had a country to run with essentially no resources. The relationship was transactional at its core. In August 1996, from Afghanistan, Osama bin Laden issued a declaration of jihad against the Americans occupying the land of the two holy mosques. It was a long document, heavy with Quranic quotations, but its core message was clear. The United States had no right to maintain military forces in Saudi Arabia, and Muslims had a religious obligation to fight and kill American soldiers wherever they could find them. The document received relatively little attention in the Western world at the time. This was a serious miscalculation. In February 1998, Osama bin Laden issued what he called a fatwa, together with Ayman al-Zawahiri, the Egyptian doctor who had become his closest partner, and several other jihadist leaders. Its title was the Declaration of the World Islamic Front for Jihad Against the Jews and Crusaders. In the context of Islamic jurisprudence, the document was not a legitimate fatwa at all. Bin Laden and his co-signatories were not qualified religious scholars with the traditional authority to issue such rulings. But its content was unmistakable. Killing Americans, all Americans, civilian or military, was declared an individual duty for every Muslim capable of doing it. It was, in effect, a religious decree ordering the mass murder of civilians. The reaction from the mainstream Islamic scholarly establishment was swift and near unanimous condemnation. Scholars across the Muslim world denounced the document as illegitimate, theologically illiterate, and morally monstrous. This is important to state clearly. The overwhelming consensus of Islamic religious scholarship across every school of jurisprudence rejected bin Laden's theology as a perversion of the faith. Al-Qaeda's claim to speak for Islam was and remains rejected by the vast majority of the world's Muslim scholars and communities. 6 months after the fatwa, Al-Qaeda demonstrated it was not merely issuing rhetoric. On the 7th of August, 1998, the 8th anniversary of the arrival of American troops in Saudi Arabia, 2 truck bombs exploded almost simultaneously outside the United States embassies in Nairobi, Kenya, and Dar es Salaam, Tanzania. The Nairobi bombing was catastrophic. The bomb killed 213 people, including 12 Americans. More than 4,000 were injured. The vast majority of the dead and wounded were Kenyan, local workers, passers-by, people with no connection to the American government. The Dar es Salaam bomb killed 11 people, all Tanzanians. The attacks demonstrated everything Al-Qaeda was, capable of planning sophisticated simultaneous operations across international borders, and utterly indifferent to the lives of Muslim civilians killed in the process. The American response, cruise missile strikes on al-Qaeda camps in Afghanistan and a pharmaceutical factory in Sudan, was largely ineffective. The strikes missed bin Laden, who had left the area before the missiles arrived, and may have aided al-Qaeda's recruitment by providing a propaganda victory. On the 12th of October 2000, a small boat packed with explosives pulled alongside the USS Cole, an American naval destroyer, refueling in the harbor of Aden, Yemen, and detonated. The explosion tore a 40-foot hole in the ship's hull. 17 American sailors were killed and 39 wounded. The attack had been in planning for years and required the establishment of a significant logistical operation inside Yemen. The incoming Bush administration treated al-Qaeda as a serious, but not yet existential threat. This was, in retrospect, one of the most consequential failures of threat assessment in modern American history. The concept of using hijacked aircraft as guided missiles had been discussed within al-Qaeda as early as 1996, when Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, a Kuwaiti operative, first proposed the idea to bin Laden. Bin Laden approved it formally in 1998 or early 1999. The operational commander was Mohammed Atta, an Egyptian architect who had become radicalized while studying in Hamburg, Germany, and who had traveled to Afghanistan in late 1999 to receive formal training and tasking from al-Qaeda leadership. Atta was brilliant, meticulous, fanatical, and utterly cold, precisely the qualities the operation required. Between 2000 and 2001, 19 men entered the United States, enrolled in flight training schools, and waited. 15 were Saudi citizens, 2 Emiratis, 1 Egyptian, 1 Lebanese. They were organized into 4 teams. The operation cost an estimated $400,000 to $500,000. By the standards of the destruction it caused, a horrifyingly efficient investment. Throughout the months of preparation, the American intelligence community was picking up signals that something significant was being planned. On the 6th of August 2001, President George W. Bush received a presidential daily brief headlined "Bin Laden Determined to Strike in U.S." It warned specifically about the possibility of hijackings. No specific action was taken. The plans continued to their completion. On the morning of the 11th of September 2001, it was a clear, cloudless Tuesday in New York City. The temperature was mild, the sky an extraordinary shade of blue, and the streets of Lower Manhattan were filling with the ordinary traffic of an ordinary workday morning. At 8:46 in the morning, American Airlines Flight 11, carrying 81 passengers and 11 crew, struck the North Tower of the World Trade Center at roughly 500 miles per hour. At 9:03, United Airlines Flight 175 struck the South Tower. At 9:37, American Airlines Flight 77 struck the western face of the Pentagon in Arlington, Virginia. At 10:03, United Airlines Flight 93 crashed into a field near Shanksville, Pennsylvania, after passengers fought the hijackers and prevented the aircraft from reaching its intended target, believed to be either the Capitol building or the White House. The South Tower collapsed at 9:59. The North Tower fell at 10:28. 2,977 people died. They came from 93 nations. They were office workers and firefighters, tourists and stockbrokers, janitors and executives. They were Muslims, Christians, Jews, Hindus, and people of every faith and none. They had nothing in common except that they were in the wrong place. When 19 men decided that their deaths would serve a political and theological purpose. Osama bin Laden watched the coverage from Afghanistan. By multiple accounts, he was exultant. He had not expected the towers to actually collapse. The structural failure exceeded his own calculations. He made no immediate public claim of responsibility. His eventual acknowledgement came through a video released in December 2001, in which he was shown discussing the attacks in terms that made his foreknowledge and direction of the operation unmistakable. The American and Allied response was rapid. The Taliban was given an ultimatum to surrender bin Laden. It refused. On the 7th of October 2001, American and British forces began aerial bombing. Within 2 months, the Taliban had been driven from all major Afghan cities. al-Qaeda's training infrastructure had been largely destroyed. But Osama bin Laden had fled. By November 2001, he was in the Tora Bora mountain complex, the cave network near the Pakistani border that he had helped build during the 1980s. He knew the terrain intimately. American intelligence tracked him there. A combination of American Special Forces, CIA operatives, and Afghan militia forces assembled to close the net. American commanders made the choice to rely primarily on Afghan militia forces, rather than large numbers of American ground troops to close the escape routes. The militia forces were unreliable and, according to subsequent accounts, were bribed by al-Qaeda to allow fighters to pass through their lines. A subsequent United States Senate investigation concluded that Osama bin Laden escaped from Tora Bora as a direct result of this decision. He crossed into Pakistan, and then, for nearly 10 years, the most wanted man in the world disappeared. He spent time in the tribal areas of Pakistan, where Pakistani government control was limited and sympathy for the Afghan jihad ran deep. He moved frequently and communicated with extraordinary caution, eventually abandoning electronic communication entirely after intelligence agencies demonstrated their ability to locate targets through intercepted phone calls. He relied on a small network of trusted couriers. Al-Qaeda, meanwhile, was adapting. The organization's core leadership was under constant pressure from American drone strikes in Pakistan's tribal areas. The organization increasingly franchised its brand. Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula in Yemen, Al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb in North Africa, Al-Shabaab in Somalia, while the central organization went underground. Bin Laden communicated with affiliates through recorded audio and video messages delivered via courier. At some point, he moved from the tribal areas to settled Pakistan. By 2005, at the latest, Osama bin Laden was living in Abbottabad, a mid-sized city of about 500,000 people in the Khyber Pakhtunkhwa province, about 50 miles north of Islamabad. Abbottabad was a military garrison town, home to the Pakistan Military Academy. It was not, on its face, an obvious place to hide. The compound where bin Laden lived for his final years was purpose-built to house him. It was large by Pakistani standards, surrounded by walls up to 18 feet high, topped with barbed wire, no telephone line, no internet connection. The residents burned their own rubbish rather than putting it out for collection. They paid for everything in cash. By the standards of the neighborhood, the compound was conspicuous in its very privacy. Bin Laden lived on the upper floors with his youngest wife, Amal al-Sadeh, a Yemeni woman who had married him in 2000. Also present was Abu Ahmed al-Kuwaiti, a trusted courier whose real name was Ibrahim Saeed Ahmed, his brother, and their families. The courier was the man who would eventually lead the CIA to the compound. The documents recovered from the compound after his death reveal a man simultaneously the ideological figurehead of a global movement and a frustrated, increasingly marginalized figure who struggled to exercise real operational control over an organization that had evolved well beyond his direct supervision. He complained in letters about the behavior of affiliated groups. He worried about civilian casualties, not from genuine concern for human life, but because he calculated correctly that killing Muslims undermined al-Qaeda's political support. The trail that led the CYA to the Abbottabad compound began not with any dramatic breakthrough, but with years of patient, methodical work, following a single thread: the identity of bin Laden's personal courier. Intelligence had been accumulating through detainee interrogations, signals intelligence, and human sources. The break came when analysts identified the courier's real name and, through surveillance of his movements, located the compound. Analysts observed that a family of unusual size appeared to live on the upper floors, but never left the grounds, never sent children to school, never received visitors in the normal Pakistani way. The man who walked in the garden was tall. CIA analysts gave him a code name, the Pacer. When CIA Director Leon Panetta eventually briefed President Obama, he assessed the probability that the Pacer was bin Laden at 60 to 80%. President Obama made the decision to act. The mission was assigned to the Naval Special Warfare Development Group, SEAL Team 6. They trained for weeks on a replica of the Abbottabad compound. 2 specially modified stealth Black Hawk helicopters carrying approximately 24 Navy SEALs would fly from Jalalabad, Afghanistan, crossing into Pakistani airspace without notification to the Pakistani government. Shortly after midnight on the 2nd of May 2011, the helicopters crossed into Pakistani airspace. The first helicopter, descending into the compound courtyard, clipped the wall with its tail rotor and crashed in the compound's garden due to an aerodynamic effect caused by the high walls and hot air temperature. No one was killed in the crash, but the mission's plan was immediately disrupted. The SEALs proceeded on foot. They breached the gates, killed the courier and his brother in the outbuilding, entered the main building, swept upward floor by floor, and reached the top floor. Osama bin Laden was there. He was shot twice, once in the chest and once, fatally, in the head above the left eye. He was unarmed. He died almost instantly. He was 53 years old. His body was identified through facial recognition and by his height, 6 feet 4 inches. DNA was compared against samples from multiple bin Laden family members held by the U.S. government. The match was confirmed within hours. His body was flown to the USS Carl Vinson, an American aircraft carrier in the North Arabian Sea. Islamic funeral rites were performed. The body was washed, wrapped in a white sheet, and prayers were read in Arabic. The body was then placed in a weighted bag and lowered into the sea. The precise location was not disclosed and will not be. Osama bin Laden's remains lie at the bottom of an ocean, in a location that no pilgrim will ever visit. At 11:35 in the evening on the 1st of May, 2011, President Barack Obama appeared in the East Room of the White House.
The United States has conducted an operation that killed Osama bin Laden, the leader of al-Qaeda,
and announced that the United States had conducted an operation that killed Osama bin Laden, the leader of al-Qaeda, and a terrorist responsible for the murder of thousands of innocent men, women, and children. Crowds gathered spontaneously outside the White House gates, and at Ground Zero in New York. Osama bin Laden is dead, but the world he helped create continues. Al-Qaeda survived his death in a weakened and fragmented form. The ideology he helped popularize spawned successor movements that, in some respects, exceeded Al-Qaeda's capabilities. The Islamic State, which emerged from the ashes of the Iraq War that the September 11th attacks helped precipitate, eventually controlled territory the size of Great Britain and attracted fighters from more than 100 countries. The September 11th attacks changed the world in ways that continue to unfold. The wars in Afghanistan and Iraq cost the United States and its allies trillions of dollars and hundreds of thousands of lives. The surveillance infrastructure built after September 11th permanently altered the relationship between governments and the privacy of their citizens. Airport security, border controls, immigration policy, the treatment of Muslim communities in Western countries, all were transformed. Among the nearly 3,000 people who died on September 11th were janitors from Senegal and traders from West Africa. Irish Americans who had never left New York and newly arrived immigrants for whom the World Trade Center represented the aspiration of everything they had come to America to find. They included hundreds of first responders, firefighters, police officers, paramedics, who ran into burning buildings because that is what they had sworn to do. Many who survived the attacks themselves did not survive the years that followed. The cancers, the respiratory diseases, the psychological wounds continue to claim lives 2 decades later. To speak of historical significance is necessary for understanding, but it must never be allowed to abstract the human reality. Osama bin Laden murdered nearly 3,000 people. He gave the order. He provided the resources. He celebrated the deaths. He sought to commit more of them. That is the irreducible core of the historical record. Perhaps the most important thing to say in any serious examination of Osama bin Laden is what he was not. He was not a representative of Islam. He was not the logical conclusion of Muslim belief. He was not what happens when Muslims take their faith seriously. The vast majority of the world's 1.8 billion Muslims rejected al-Qaeda's theology comprehensively. Muslim scholars from every school of jurisprudence condemned the September 11th attacks. The overwhelming majority of al-Qaeda's victims across its entire history have themselves been Muslim. Bin Laden's theology was not mainstream. Islam taken to its extreme. It was a radical modern political ideology that used Islamic vocabulary to justify conclusions that Islamic scholarship had consistently and comprehensively condemned. Who was Osama bin Laden, finally, beneath the mythology? He was a man of genuine personal courage, who was also a mass murderer. A man of sincere religious conviction who perverted the faith he claimed to serve. A man of considerable organizational talent who used those talents to build networks of death. A man who genuinely believed he was fighting for the liberation of Muslim peoples, and who caused those peoples incalculable suffering in the name of that liberation. He was not a cartoon villain, and he was not a misunderstood martyr. He was a human being who made choices shaped by his background, his faith, his psychology, and the historical moment in which he lived, and who bears full moral responsibility for those choices and their consequences. Osama bin Laden died at 53 years old, shot in the head in a Pakistani compound, buried in an unmarked ocean grave. The world he sought to create did not come into being. What did come into being was something considerably more ambiguous, a more fearful world, a more surveilled world, a world of longer wars and deeper hatreds, a world in which his name remains one of the most recognized on earth more than a decade after his death. The questions he raised about power and poverty, about intervention and sovereignty, about what desperate men will do when they believe the world has offered them no other option, remain as urgent and as contested as ever. Osama bin Laden is gone. The argument he began has not ended, and it falls to each of us, living in the world he helped make, to decide how we answer it.